All right, guys, today I want to present something to you I think will be a challenge. It's been a life lesson for me that I've picked up on the last couple of years. I can't say that I've mastered it by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a process that goes on within me, and it's been a very tough road for me to walk down, to be able to kind of wrap my mind around this. And that is sometimes when you are faced with a perplexing situation, a problem, a conundrum, and you feel like everything that you do is wrong. Or if you don't feel like everything you do is wrong, you feel like at the very least everything you're doing is making it worse, right? Certainly you can relate to this. And it's just common to the human condition. So what do you do about this? I mean, there's all sorts of examples that creep up in our minds. Mine might be different than yours. Certainly a lot of them would be something we'd all have in common with each other. Illnesses, broken relationships, or financial struggles, whatever they might be, sometimes the more we do, the harder it is and the worse we make things. We can't figure out why. We just figure, well, we're doing the wrong things. We've got to figure out what the right thing is to do. Well, I've learned something about this, and and I think it's valuable enough to me to share it with you, and I have found a great illustration to bring the point home, to rein it in, to make it stick. Now, here's what it is. In 1932, Mahatma Gandhi was battling peacefully for the civil rights of the people of India. It's 350 million people strong. And they were up against the British government, who didn't want to give them freedom of speech, um, freedom of press, and all sorts of things. All sorts of civil rights were being fractured. And so Mahatma Gandhi did not want to see an all-out war, which is really easy in a country of 350 million people. But he decided that he would tell the people to make your own clothes, grow your own food, boycott all the goods uh, from the United Kingdom, from the British government, which put a real crunch on Great Britain financially. So they decided to throw him in jail, and he wanted to do a fast to the death, if that's what it took. Now, my illustration really here is not so much about Gandhi, but that was just to paint a backdrop so that I can tell you about somebody else. You see, in Time magazine in 1932, they published a very short article about something that occurred. And this example here shines so brightly in my mind. In fact, I don't think I'll be able to get it out. I don't want it out. I want to always remember this, and I hope that you will too. And instead of trying to memorize the details of this, which I think if I tried to rehash it to you in my own words, I'd actually make it longer. Instead, I will read the very short article to you, and I hope that you will find uh, the same enjoyment out of it that I did. I hope that it will be as poignant to you as it is to me. Now, here's what it said. At Yerwada Jail near Pune, in a cell not far from the one which houses the sainted person of Mahatma Gandhi, one day last week sat another nationalist leader named L.B. Bopakar. Suddenly he heard a warning shout, saw before him a large, ugly cobra. The warden who shouted ran off for a club, while prisoner Bopakar was left alone with his cobra. Regarded as sacred by most Indians, the cobra must be avoided, not slain. But prisoner Bopakar, locked in his cell, could not avoid this one. Unarmed, neither could he kill it. As the cobra fixed him with his jeweled eyes, he sat cross-legged, giving back stare for stare. For 10 minutes, neither moved a muscle. Then the warden returned, clubbed the cobra to death. That was wrong, said St. Gandhi severely. The cobra's visit was a good omen. Now, stop and think about that for a minute. And if you have to, rewind the video and listen to the article again, because there's so much that can be taken away from that. Bobakar was in his cell, unable to do anything about a uh, paralyzing situation. I mean, a deadly cobra had crawled in. He couldn't run from it. He had nothing to defend himself from it. All he could do was stare at it. And it's bad enough, when you're facing a dangerous situation and you don't know what's going to happen. It's even worse when the very thing that poses a threat to you stares you straight in the eyes, right? I think that's what makes this story so meaningful, at least to me. To have something sitting there staring you in the eyes as if to dare you to do anything at all. So, what did Beaupicard do? He stared back. He couldn't go anywhere, he couldn't defend himself, so he just sat and stared. Now, the outcome was not one that either Gandhi or Beaupicard would have wished, because they saw this as a good omen. However, it doesn't mean that fear was completely absent from the situation. Obviously, it was. He knew enough not to flinch a muscle, but neither did the Cobra. It was a waiting game. You see, here's what I have learned personally, long before I ever had heard this story, is that a lot of times the situations that I'm facing are made worse by my activity. They're made worse by my need to do something. And this goes for anything. It doesn't mean that you never take action when you can. If I walk into a yard and I'm caught unawares by a vicious dog, I know not to run, but I also know that there may be a time when I have to do something. So some situations do call for action, but not all situations do. You may be in a situation that you feel like your hands are tied, and yet you're struggling against it. And then when you find out that you're able to do something, you probably shouldn't have done anything at all because you just made it worse. And you're sitting there thinking to yourself, if I had just done something else, if I could just figure out what it is I'm supposed to do. But consider for a minute, just for a moment, that maybe you are to do nothing at all. See, the waiting game is the hardest thing for anybody to deal with. It's the hardest thing to do. Waiting something out. Because we all feel like we should be proactive. We all feel like we should be rectifying the situation. There must be something we have to do, right? But sometimes, what I've learned at least, sometimes in life, it calls for a waiting game, as a stare down. It's kind of like what you see in boxing or the UFC when they go to the weigh-ins and they stand up in each other's face. They might even raise their fist, but they stare each other in the eyes to see who's going to back down first. And it's always kind of funny to me, kind of humorous, because I feel like it's just clouds without rain. And a lot of times it is. Not that they don't mean what they feel at the time, but the truth is sussed out in the cage or the ring. But sometimes things don't have to go that far. Sometimes they never make it. Sometimes things take care of themselves on their own. And so the guard left, came back 10 minutes later, 10 minutes later with a club, and killed the Cobra. But Gandhi didn't like that. He saw it as a good omen. He saw this was a good thing. And that's what I would also toss in your direction, is that perhaps the very thing that you're facing, that you feel paralyzed by, that you're afraid to death over, not just because it's a threat by its proportions, but also by the fact that it's willing to stare you in the eyes. It's a very daunting thing. I would say learn how to stare it back down. Sometimes these things don't call for you to do anything. Sometimes they will take care of themselves. Oftentimes they will. But see, what happens is that we don't believe that. In fact, we don't believe it because we've never entertained it. And we don't entertain it because we just feel like it goes against our nature. But perhaps you need to go against your nature. It wasn't against the Cobra's nature, right? But any other man who didn't know better wouldn't have just sat there. He would have screamed, he would have climbed the walls, he would have panicked, but certainly he would have met his fate. And people don't want to wait. They don't want to stare down. They don't want to sit with steely resolve and stare the menace in the eyes. What they want to do is they want to be active, and then they get bit. That's right, they get bit. But you don't have to always do something. You can stare at the problem down the eyes. Just think about it. When you are at a loss and you feel like there's nothing else you can do, you feel like your hands are tired and you can't come up with anything to do, perhaps it's because you're not supposed to do anything. You see, oftentimes we will be willing to shift all blame for whatever has happened to ourselves just so that we can justify doing something. We have a real problem with sitting back and waiting. So we shift blame to ourselves when the blame shouldn't even be on us to begin with. And then not only are you putting yourself in harm's way, now you're having to live with the psychological grief and guilt and the penalty of putting this on yourself. So I would say learn from L.B. Bopakar. Learn how to sit and wait and be still. But because perhaps that is the real answer. Maybe that is the solution to your problem. It may not fit all situations, but next time something crops up and you can't figure out what to do, think about this video. Think about what you've heard and give it some consideration. Give it some thought. Sit still, wait it out, and stare it down. Either it will respect you, or it will flee from you, or it will take care of itself. I hope that meant something to you guys. If you've liked this video, hit the thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. And I will catch you on the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.